Thank you for coming out in this very, very inclement weather. I hope the talk doesn't match the weather. One thing I've learned about doing book talks, maybe from watching book TV, is as well as I need to restrain my inner professor. And we, as professors, and I've been a professor at Tulane for going on 35 years, although I'm about to fold my tent and pack it in, is that we want to tell you everything, every chapter, title, verse. And if I did that, it probably would bore you on the one hand, and secondly, tell you so much about the book that you say, why should I even buy it? And so I don't want to do that. And the other thing I've learned is that audiences really are more interested in why someone like me writes a book, devotes 5 years of his time to slogging through the literature to come up with a story. And so I'm going to tell you more about why I wrote the book than what the book's about. Although I think those two questions, what's the book's about and why I wrote it, are pretty much the flip side of the same coin. And you'll see what I mean as I get into my talk. First off, let me tell you what the book's about. This is the elevator pitch. The book's about the founding of New Orleans in 1718, when they moved the city from, moved the headquarters of the capital from Mobile over to the river. And it's about the first 100 years of muddling through. Another way of putting it is that it's about how the French founded it, how the Spanish organized it, gave it a corporate identity, and how people from Africa, mainly Senegambia and the Congo and the Bight of Benin and the Gold Coast, actually pulled it from the mud and built it. That's a story I kind of unfold here, and it's a layered story. Why I wrote it, it's a much simpler explanation. Katrina, that's what impelled me to write this book. Now, Katrina's mentioned only once, I think, in the text, twice if you include the acknowledgments, but that's really why I wrote it, because of the, not the natural disaster, but the bureaucratic disaster of 2005, the storm that won't end, the federal flood of 2005. We have a lot of ways of describing that flood, that storm. And I can remember when I decided to write it. I've told this story over and over again, so it's pretty deeply imprinted in cortical memory right now. We were evacuating to, first we evacuated to Houston. And like most New Orleanians, when you, and probably folks from this part of the world too, when you evacuate, you usually think it's going to be for, a couple of days unplanned vacation. This one did turn out to be that. And when we saw the city fill up with water, we knew that we weren't going to be coming back for a while, so we headed up from Houston to Kentucky and then on to Maryland, where my wife's family is. So we were going to, hunker down there for we don't know how long. Well, on our way to Kentucky, we stayed at a Holiday Inn outside Little Rock, Arkansas. And I can remember almost the date and the time. After I got up and went down to the breakfast bar, you had to go through the bar, and some guys had been in the bar all night. It's 7 a.m. and I'm looking up at this flat screen television above the bar. And there's the first satellite images are flashing on the screen, showing the city underwater from, I don't know how many, 60,000 feet or however high up those satellites are. And all of us at the time were trying to figure out, did it flood our neighborhood, flood our house? And it was hard to seeing all these rooftops underwater to get a bearing of where it was, until I glanced up at the corner of that flat screen. It looked like a huge bathtub, and then it dawned on me this was Tad Gormley Stadium in City Park. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the geography of New Orleans, but that's a football stadium where they have a lot of big high school football games. Even Tulane plays some of its games there now. So I said, this is pretty serious. I had been thinking, because I've been teaching Louisiana history for about 30-some years, that I would eventually write a history of New Orleans, if not the entire thing, some aspect of it. But I was going to do it on a schedule dictated by my own needs, my own career aspirations, ambitions, and not one dictated by the weather. But after seeing that image, I realized, you know, I better do something quickly, because it wasn't clear in my mind that the city was going to rebound, or if it did rebound, you know, whether it was going to come back as anything more of a self-parody of Bourbon Street, you know, another X-rated Disneyland, if you will. And the economy already before the storm was pretty shaky. In fact, it was in the toilet. People were leaving. Medical specialists were fleeing to greener pastures. Lawyers were stepping out their stampede to Houston, where all the big oil deals were done over 2 martini lunches and, you know, send breath afterwards. The infrastructure was, quite frankly, broken beyond almost repair, it seemed. I mean, you had, I don't know how many million tons of water on this city. And that city has been built by millennia of mud, and mud, as you know, compacts. And the water was compacting it even more, so it was breaking water mains, gas mains, sewage lines. And for months and months, the mainstay of the tourist economy, the fine restaurants, couldn't get open again because there was too much water in the gas lines, you know, which they used for the cooking. And so it looked pretty bad, and my mood was about as gloomy as the weather outside at the time. And I think it's because I'm an Army brat. I'm used to moving and pulling up roots and moving on, and it looked like I was about to do that again. In fact, I was encouraged to apply for another job, and indeed I did. And I'm glad I didn't get the job, and I was allowed to stay put. Anyway, I was going to write this story. And the story, it came out of a talk. The history began out of a talk that I delivered at the University of Michigan about the 3rd week of September. And the title of the talk will tell you something about where my mood was. The working title of the book and the title of the talk was New Orleans, an American Pompeii, ? Because I was pretty much convinced this was going to be a story of decline, about or the city declining into a lost city of myth and tourism, sort of like Pompeii itself today. And I thought too that I could, you know, do this in one volume. That I was going to begin, as I'd like to quip, in primordial ooze and jump ahead to Katrina sludge, and do that in 360 pages and maybe in 1 year. My wife thought I was smoking something, but I'd give that up years and years ago. But in any event, that's what I thought I would do. And so I was as much concerned with the present in the immediate post-Katrina period than I was with the past. I mean, I started reading in the 18th century, and I didn't know a lot about the 18th century, quite frankly, until I got into this book. But I'm spending maybe the first 6 or 8 months just reading the newspapers every day, combing the Times-Picayune, this was the glory days of the Times-Picayune, and what they did to report that story, to create blogs to allow people to find each other. I mean, it was really heroic journalism. And I was reading that every day, and reading the New York Times and reading the Los Angeles Times, because the journalists were descending on this place as though this was a wonderful Rorschach test for what's right and what's wrong with America. The waters of Katrina, when you think about it, probably revealed as much as they covered. It revealed a lot of poverty, a lot of racial poverty, among other things, and plus the sorry state of the national infrastructure. Because New Orleans, in terms of its infrastructural problem, was like the rest of America, only more so. It was just sort of amplified and magnified. So I'm collecting all this stuff. I'm organizing it into file folders under crime, infrastructure, economic development, housing, public housing, crime, police, race. Race is a big red thread that runs through the entire story. And I'm doing this and filling up file cabinets, and then I'm filling up file boxes. Then when I run out of space, I'm filling up flash drive. And finally, after 6 to 8 months into this, I realized that I can't do this. I'm trying to compete with journalists. I'm trying to be real hot and au courant. And I couldn't do it. I mean, there were some really good books coming out. Jed Horn's Breach of Faith, which I think is the best book on Katrina itself. Mark Schleifstein and John McQuaid's book, Path of Destruction, which is the best treatment of FEMA, to tell you the truth, and a very even-handed, balanced, and fair-minded assessment. Because for all of us down there, FEMA is kind of a four-letter, all-purpose four-letter word, I will tell you. And some outside treatments, a lot of them are kind of drive-by analyses. You get a lot of that, but some outside historians, activists, analysts were doing a pretty good job. I couldn't compete, and so I decided, well, I better just kind of go back and write a straight history, and if I get up to the present, all well and good, but I need to get started here. Because I was under contract to this editor. He actually even gave me an advance. So, I mean, I needed to do something. Now, all this kind of noodling around, ferreting around in contemporary affairs, current events, wasn't time, I don't think it was time or energy wasted. Because, as I've told, and I've told this story repeatedly, and I'm more convinced of it than ever, that it was really shaping how I was approaching the past, approaching the 18th century. I mean, you know, you don't realize it, but a lot of history is really written from through a prism that is ground in the present. I mean, you can't write something that people want to read if you don't do it in a way that is somehow relevant to a general reader of your own time. You can't be relevant to someone in the 18th century because it would seem boring and antiquarian. So this book, even though I don't mention Katrina, is somehow shaped and molded by the preoccupations coming out of Katrina. And one question that really got me off on a different tangent, that took me off the course I had planned, was a question that was probably more taunt than question, coming from people like the former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, or Jerry Falwell and the rest, who were excoriating us, scolding us for being where we were. In fact, asking, why were you so stupid to build a city below sea level? Well, most of the city's not below sea level, by the way. And why should we pour more money into this sinkhole of vice and corruption, of political dysfunction, economic backwardness? Why should we do it? Let's flatten the place, let's move on, let's organize an orderly retreat to higher ground. And this stuff was